right, the most important announcement, as far as I am concerned, out of Bitcoin 2024 was not President Trump. It was not the strategic reserve. It was not any of that headline grabbing stuff that came out there, which, by the way, was absolutely fantastic. And I want to just take a second to acknowledge and congratulate the Bitcoin Magazine team and the conference team that put together such an amazing conference. When I last went to a Bitcoin conference in 2021, I had a weird feeling about it, right? I kind of felt like, okay, the children are still here. This is not really, big money still not coming in. This is still turning into a conference for people that have just discovered Bitcoin. It might be the first ever investment that they've ever discovered. And after a life of going to, real estate conferences, equities conferences, gold conferences, all this other shit, it was like, this is not really my vibe, right? It felt more like a high school party than anything else. However, I will say, I think that tide has turned. So what I'm saying is I will be at Bitcoin 2025 in Las Vegas, and I will attend several Bitcoin events over the next year or so, starting in 2025, because I think hopefully I should be at BTC Prague as well, which is another great conference from what I heard. And again, the tide has turned there too. So I think that now if you have above 1 Bitcoin, because that should be your ultimate primary objective, then I think that going to these conferences may, depending on what your goals are, may allow you to have a net positive now that the tide has turned. You've got multi-billionaires hanging out at these conferences. You have people who are impacting the future of Bitcoin in a real way at these conferences. What do I mean by that? Here's what I mean by that. And this is one of the things that I think is the single most important thing that has happened at this conference that nobody's paying attention to. Everyone's focused on Trump. Everyone's focused on the strategic reserves. Everyone's focused on fire Gary Gensler. Yeah. It's just like dumb energy. The real announcement, as far as I'm concerned, came from Cantor Fitzgerald. Now, Cantor Fitzgerald manages trillions of dollars of liquidity in the U.S. Treasury markets. They are one of the, I think, 24 firms that is allowed to generate instant liquidity backed by the U.S. government on demand, no matter what. And Howard Lutnick basically went on stage as a CEO, right? And this firm has a really great story too. Impacted heavily by 9/11, built up, and it's a powerful firm now. Howard Lutnick went on stage and said, look, firstly, Cantor Fitzgerald owns a shitload of Bitcoin. And then he clarified on Twitter that he said shedload, not shitload. But I kind of prefer the legend of him saying shitload. So we're just going to go and assume that he said shitload. He said Cantor Fitzgerald owns a shitload of Bitcoin, right? That's pretty gangster of a CEO at that level to say that, even though he said shedload. But he then went to say that on top of all of that, because another thing that people don't realize is Cantor Fitzgerald does all the liquidity management for USDT, Tether, which is, from what I can see and what I can hear, is the chosen stable coin for the USA, right? He said, look, Sam Bankman-Fried told the story of Sam Bankman-Fried trying to destroy Tether and tried to get, $10 billion of liquidity in a single day, and it was all fulfilled, right? And then that caused shockwaves in the system because they have everything backed up. Tether has everything backed up. So he basically said Tether is the chosen child when it comes to having a USD stable coin, right? But then he went on to say, which was the single biggest announcement, and this is the type of things that I really like to ask you to help me get out to the world, because this is the type of information that no one's really talking about, and because it's high, quote unquote, high level finance, people don't really understand the future impacts of it. When I started talking about the impact of BlackRock applying for an ETF, and inside of 1 year, we went from a president that didn't like Bitcoin to, potentially a Bitcoin House, a Bitcoin Senate, a Bitcoin president, because of the background work of whatever Larry Fink and all of these fund asset managers are doing, basically. People didn't understand it then either. Now they understand. Now they understand what British HODL was saying last year, literally 1 year ago to this point, about why you need to get to 1 Bitcoin and who's coming into this game and why them coming into this game is specifically important. So anyway, Howard Lutnick gets on stage and he basically announces that Cantor Fitzgerald, this is not a fly-by-night BlockFi. This is not a bullshit Celsius. This is not, some firm that's been created out of a bunch of VCs who were circle jerking one night about what the future of finance could look like. This is Cantor Fitzgerald. He gets on stage and says, we are assigning a $2 billion business. We're launching a $2 billion business that is going to basically provide leverage and liquidity on your Bitcoin so you never have to sell your Bitcoin. This is the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald getting on stage. This is like a person who is one of the arms of the Federal Reserve, basically, right? He's one of 24 arms of the Federal Reserve. You can generate liquidity at any moment in time, in any second, completely backed by the US government. Getting on stage and saying, we're launching a $2 billion business to allow people to never sell their Bitcoin, to generate leverage and liquidity on their Bitcoin. And once we fulfill that $2 billion worth of loans, we're going to increase it at a clip of $2 billion at a time, right? Just think about how powerful this is. Just think about what he's announced here. This is a banker, right? That is in traditional Bitcoin world, we'd be like, oh, fuck these bankers. No, this is a banker who's part of the club, right? Which is the access to the Federal Reserve liquidity, instant access to Federal Reserve liquidity, saying that we are going to create a facility so that you never need to sell your Bitcoin. You can borrow against it, leverage against it, and we're going to start off with $2 billion of lending to prove the concept. Think about that. This is not, again, I want to highlight who this is. This is Cantor Fitzgerald. This is not a VC-generated future of finance type of firm, right? This is Cantor Fitzgerald coming out and saying, we're launching this. We want a loan against Bitcoin. We're gonna do all the calculations to make sure the LTVs and everything else stay the same. We're gonna underwrite it, and ultimately it's backed by the US government and the US government's ability to print money, which is an unlimited amount of money printing. So this is an absolutely fantastic announcement, and I think it was completely and utterly ignored by most people because it is a complicated thing to understand. Why is this important? What this means is that the HODL rate is going to go up. As I said last year, these new type of buyers that are coming in never sell assets. And if you've been subscribed to the channel, you know I've been saying this for a year, right? There's a lot of people that are new watching that are going, no, this is a new no, it's not. If you've been watching for a year, I want you to put in the comments whether you heard me say this or not, right? Put in the comments whether you have been aware that this is coming or not by watching this channel, because that's what I want people to understand. I want to elevate the game in a little bit of understanding how long-term finance, how big finance is going to come in and look at Bitcoin. And I think we've done a pretty good job so far with understanding how people like BlackRock, how people like Fidelity, et cetera, are going to be looking at this. So now, Cantor Fitzgerald has announced a $2 billion fund to do this. So guess what's going to be next? Fidelity is going to be next, BlackRock's going to be next, Goldman Sachs is going to be next, everyone's going to come. And what this means is, the benefit of this is very simple. The HODL rate goes up, right? Now you don't have to sell your Bitcoin to generate liquidity. There's obviously going to be the small holders that do that because they don't know how to get access to these products, and that's absolutely fine. But the people who are now buying the ETFs and everything else are going to be able to loan against their ownership of Bitcoin, whether it's apparently physical, quote unquote, physical Bitcoin or the ETFs. And they're going to be able to generate liquidity without ever having to sell this asset ever again. What does that also mean? It means that you no longer have a tax liability on your Bitcoin, because let's say Bitcoin gets down to the 200-week moving average, which is where my ideal point of borrowing against my Bitcoin would be the 200-week moving average, a 4-year moving average, you can now generate, 15, 20% liquidity against your Bitcoin position and just watch the thing ride up, and you don't have to pay any tax against it. You never, ever have to let go of your Bitcoin ever again. This is absolutely huge. It's going to increase the HODL rate, not decrease it. People are not understanding how important this is, and I want you to share this message and subscribe to the channel. Help me spank the YouTube algorithm to get this message out in front of more people. Remember, the faster you subscribe, the faster this helps me get the message out. And that's what's important, because this is the single most important message that came out of Bitcoin 2024, in my opinion. It's the single thing that made me decide that I need to be at the next conference, because we've now crossed the Rubicon here, right? On what's going on with Bitcoin. All of the other stuff is cool, and we'll see whether the President Trump gets elected or not, or whatever else. This is real. Cantor Fitzgerald is doing this. They've done this. They own a shitload of Bitcoin. Shitload of Bitcoin. And Howard Lutnick doesn't look like he's a person who's going to stop without trying to get as much business of the liquidity generation on Bitcoin as possible. And that's what we need. We need more CEOs like that. We need higher finance. So people always ask me in 2021, hey, why don't you do, a BlockFi or a Celsius loan against your Bitcoin? I said, listen, if it was BlackRock or Fidelity or someone like that backing my loan, I can completely understand doing that. Not when it's some VC-generated fucking company who basically ended up going bankrupt, right? And is now, one of them is clawing back funds from their investors who were smart enough to take it out at the right time. So look, the bottom line is this. This is a game-changing moment in Bitcoin. We are now at the precipice where one of the main 24 arms of the Federal Reserve fiat system is now saying we are going to loan against Bitcoin in a safe and stable way. We're going to manage liquidity, and no matter what happens, we're backed by the US government, and we have the ability to generate liquidity at a second's notice. Billions and trillions of dollars worth of liquidity at a second's notice. This is a game-changing moment. I need you to do more study into this. Watch this, follow this. Forget all the other hyperbole that came out of the event. This is the single most important thing that came out of this event. Share this video, but ultimately there are always only 3 rules to Bitcoin. Step number 1, you buy Bitcoin. Step number 2, shut the fuck up. And step number 3, you get fabulously wealthy.